Good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's Facebook Live. Today's topic is on all things core stability. So without further ado, we'll just dive straight on into it. I have chosen this topic not only because of how important it is to understand kind of this topic and the areas around it, but since working here at On Your Game, it is evident that there is a very common misunderstanding and lack of education behind what exactly the core is and how having a strong core can help reduce injuries and improve day-to-day life and sports performance. So as I go through this video, I will discuss a few things, a few different topics regarding the core, and these will be kind of what exactly the core is, why a strong core is so important in injury prevention and spinal support, and finally, how we can strengthen your and our core stability. Okay, so let's dive into the main topics I'm here to discuss regarding the core. So what is the core? First of all, I've noticed among many patients that there is a common misunderstanding regarding the core. This is that most individuals understand the core to simply be the abdominal muscles or abs. However, just because some people may have six-pack does not necessarily mean that they have a strong core. It does obviously help, but yeah, a six-pack does not necessarily mean that they've got a great core. The abdominals is just a part of that, but we'll go into that a little bit more. There is so much more to the core and its function in the human body, in movement and sport. So the core is located around the middle of our body, so known as the trunk of the human body or the body's torso. The main function of the core musculature is to stabilize the trunk and the spine whilst the rest of the body is moving during functional movements. So these functional movements that I just mentioned, they are highly dependent on this part of the body, and a lack of core muscular development or core muscular strength can result in an increase in the likelihood of someone sustaining an injury. The major muscles of the core reside in the area of the belly and the mid to the lower back. These are between 15 to 20 different muscles that make up the core of our body. And obviously in this video, I won't go into mentioning what these are. Knowing their names will not be much of a benefit throughout this video. The main reason I mentioned all the different types of the muscles is because I just highlighted this in order for you guys to understand that there's a large makeup of muscles in the core muscle group, and it's not just this common misconception that it's the abdominals only. So what are the main functions of the core? So the main function of these muscles all together are to stabilize the hips, the pelvis, and the shoulders. Okay. So now I've provided some information about the core and what this is exactly, obviously in a simple manner. We don't want to dive too much into the ins and outs of it. I hope that this kind of basic understanding that I've given you of why core stability is so important, this is what I'm going to go into a little bit further now, and hopefully this understanding, will be a little bit more beneficial throughout. Okay. So why is the core so important? As I previously mentioned, the core acts as a stabilizing mechanism of the trunk and the spine. Okay. Therefore, it is understandably vitally important in postural control. Many people in today's day and age spend many hours sitting at a desk or standing for long periods of time, to go with their job requirements and everything. And as the days go on, the muscles get fatigued, and you may find that your posture, you begin to slump a little bit more, and the thought of consciously staying upright with your shoulders back, becomes harder and harder, and you end up just giving up into this urge of, just wanting to slump down at the end of the day. We've all been there. I'm still there, certainly at the end of most days. Had a long, tiring day, and the last thing you feel like doing is, standing upright and making sure everything's correct. But that is what we need to do, and through the help of a strong core, that's made easier and easier, and these good habits can be created. Okay, so the core stability strength therefore provides this extra support to the spine to help maintain its upright, erect posture and avoid the bad habit of slumping or slouching for a long period of time. In my previous live video, which was on mechanical neck pain, I explained the effects of what a bad posture and how this can cause stiffness and achiness, which may result in you becoming more susceptible to injury. The slump and slouching of the spine is no different to the neck. Okay, so being in a slumped or slouched position or posture for a long period of time will cause structures in your upper and your lower back to weaken and to stiffen up. And as a result, the muscles, become more dysfunctional. They don't start to perform and function in the way that they are supposed to. And this may lead to an increased risk of getting injured. Okay, so injuries to the back or the spine are more often than not caused by a combination of bending forwards or bending to the side, or during rotation movements. Back injuries are again more often than not caused by a history of repetitive or excessive loading with improper mechanics or posture. So in order to prevent these injuries from happening to the back, we ideally need to improve the bracing and spinal support during all these ranges of movement. So, therefore, as we move, we run, we jump, we throw, we lift objects, we have this extra support in the spine, which will protect it from sustaining injuries that are caused by improper postural control. So the question is, what is this extra spinal support that we are required during this movement? The answer is your core stability. Okay. Another reason why core stability is vitally important for us as humans is because our skeleton, being the bones and the joints, go through a large number of different forces every day. When we walk for long periods of time, when we're jumping, when we're running, or even when we're walking up and down stairs, which pretty much everybody does on a daily basis, these repetitive forces that are being sustained during these simple movements are heightened when we play sport at a higher intensity, and the physical demands on our skeletal system, like I mentioned, the bones and the joints, increase when we perform the common movements in sports such as, jumping, changing directions, or throwing, etc. There's many, many more. This therefore leads me on to the next benefit of the core, and this is the absorption and the transfer of force production, so kind of our power, okay, through what we call the kinetic chain. Okay, so the core helps us absorb any forces that we are experiencing, day to day, like I mentioned, in the walking, jumping, running, or on the sports field. But it also helps us transfer this force from our lower limbs toward the upper limbs. Okay, this is done through what we call the kinetic chain of the body. Think of the movement of a throw. Okay, so just think of the mechanism. Say you're playing a sport like netball, or you're playing a sport like basketball or cricket or anything like that, which involves you throwing. Okay, if you were to, when you think of the movement for a throw, we first step with our front leg, we rotate our hips, we rotate our shoulders, the whole upper body rotates, and then the shoulder comes through for a throw. Okay, if you were now to compare the power output that you could get with that throw compared to a throw where you're standing, with your feet together, and all that's moving is just your arm in that movement, obviously, it's fairly obvious which throw you're going to be able to generate more power, and that's through the throw, where everything's coming together. You're transferring the forces from your hips up through your torso, through your core, up into the shoulders, all the way into into your arm for a much more powerful throw. Okay, so the same mechanisms go for a boxer. When throwing a punch at their opponent, the core allows us to transfer these forces through the body and ultimately allow us to perform at the best of our abilities with reduced likelihood of sustaining an injury. Okay, so going back to that boxing example, if you were to stand opposite someone, you're not going to move anything besides your hitting arm, and you were just to throw a punch. Yeah, you'll probably hurt them, but it's not going to be too bad in comparison to if you were to stand, step with the left leg, twist, turn with that right shoulder, and then follow through, all with the forces coming together through this kinetic chain that I mentioned in creating a more powerful impact to the opponent. So the same goes, whilst those are sporting examples, the same goes with everything from day-to-day life. From walking up and down stairs, rather than just walking up the stairs, very, very limp and with not much control, the core will allow us to get up those stairs a lot stronger, to not feel that, we were more susceptible to injuries when doing these smaller day-to-day activities. Okay, so how can core strength be improved? It's a very common misconception that core, as I mentioned earlier, is all about abdominals. I talk to some patients and I say, yeah, we're gonna have to look at strengthening your core, and then they, the first thing they say to me is, yeah, I've been trying to do sit-ups at home. I've been doing this for my abdominals, that and this, and whilst in the past, core strength was understood to be improved through strengthening our abdominals, through sit-ups, like I mentioned, through crunches, and other large range of movement exercises. Whereas now, more recently, research has now concluded that core stability and core strength can actually be improved more thoroughly through more functional type exercises, which target the stability of the shoulder, the torso, and the hips, keeping them in a nice alignment. Okay, so therefore, the exercises which allow this kind of straight alignment of the shoulders down to the hips are very likely to be using the core musculature to maintain the strong and steady position. Okay, so a simple yet very effective example of an exercise that targets the core strength is, I'm sure many of you have heard of it before, it's simply the front plank. Okay, if you picture yourself in this position, that's when you're on all fours with your elbows in this position, and you're nice and flat with your flat back, and you're holding yourself, tensing your core and your abdominal muscles and all the transverse abdominis, all the muscles that are involved with the core, keeping everything nice and aligned. Okay, so the core muscles help prevent, in this position, the core muscles help prevent the hips and the shoulders from dropping down to the floor, and therefore are working hard to maintain the alignment during this exercise. Over time, you can increase the length of time that you're going to be performing this plank for, but my advice would be to start off with shorter periods, such as 30 seconds. And as your core gets stronger, you will notice that your ability to withhold this position for longer periods of time will improve, and therefore the length of time to hold this exercise can increase accordingly. So I wouldn't want you going to saying, right, I'm going to go and do a 2-minute plank, and you get up to 30 seconds and everything starts shaking, your hips start to drop, your shoulders start to drop a little bit. This is, where A, you aren't going to enjoy that exercise, you're not going to want to do it anymore, and B, other injuries can start coming into play with this malalignment and pushing your body too hard too soon. I'm sure you've heard it many a times if you've been seeing any of the physiotherapists that are on your game. It's all about kind of a gradual progression of exercises as everything starts strengthening up together. So there are numerous amounts of exercises to perform in order to strengthen your core. Often, I believe the more simple exercises to be the most effective. And again, I would suggest just starting off with simple exercises and progressing as your core strength improves. So in saying that, I've decided not to just sit here and list loads of different core strengthening exercises that you could perform. Rather, I'm going to leave you with the front plank as my recommendation. I see this works the best for myself, it works the best for my clients, and it's very simple and easy to do. You can do it in the comfort of your own home. You don't have to be in any sort of exercise or gymming environment. Okay. However, in saying that, I would always say it is vitally important that you are ensuring that you are performing these exercises with the correct technique. And I would recommend that, speaking to an exercise specialist or using the power of Google to understand the exercise positioning and tips first prior to performing it yourself. So, ensuring that you have got all the tips that the exerciser may provide you. So, for example, going back to that front plank, it's always some good analogies that I often tell my patients are, bracing your core, trying to bring your belly button in towards your spine, squeezing your glute muscles. Imagine yourself to be like an ironing board, or you've got a cup of water on your back, and any kind of dips or drops of the back or the hips, will cause that water to spill, and that's not what we want. Okay, so as much as you think that yes, I've got many years of experience in the gym and I know how to do this, I would still suggest that nailing down the basics of the exercise and listening to some exercise professionals regarding tips and tricks on how to perform the exercise safely and effectively. Okay. So obviously this has been a bit of a whistle-stop tour on all things core stability, but I really wanted to keep it nice and simple because lots of people have this misconception around it. And I think that although it's been, short and sweet, I think it's going to, really be effective in helping people understand more about the core and the benefits that it has with the body and in sporting performances and just day-to-day activity. Okay. So to summarize kind of everything that I've gone over, having a stable core is vitally important for preventing injuries and also for enhancing performances in sports and other activities. Don't worry about training specific muscles of the core. That's why I didn't go into mention exactly what they are. You want to train the core as one big muscle group. Okay, they're all important for the spinal stability and the transfer of forces throughout the body. From the feet all the way up to the shoulders into the hands. So think instead about how the body moves together and how to challenge the core from bending and twisting too much in any direction. Having a neutral spine during performances of these exercises is vital to performing them correctly and safely. So as I mentioned, imagining you're in a kind of flat iron board position, that's maintaining a nice neutral spine without any flexing of the shoulders or hyperextension or anything like that. So just nice and neutral, nice and flat, okay? And finally, working with an exercise or a fitness professional to help ensure the safety and proper technique is recommended to help develop a core stability program that will deliver the results that you are after, okay? So if you want to understand anything else about the core and, any other questions you have to ask, please feel free to pop them in the comment section and I'll get back to you as soon as I can, and as well as I can, of course. So, no harm in doing your own little bit of understanding and reading further about the core. All the basics I've just mentioned. There's plenty more that gets into a little bit more complicated stuff. But I hope this has given you a nice little understanding of all things core stability, and how you can keep it simple. So one of my favorite phrases is keeping it simple, and I think with core that it applies to that even more than anything else. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you managed to learn something a little bit more about the core and how important it is for you. Take care and have a great evening.